a little after 2 in the plains, a little bit after 1 in the mountains. I'm Michael Daugherty. I'm the chair of the NACDEP Member Services Committee. On behalf of NACDEP and the committee, I would like to welcome all of you to this as part of our periodic webinar series. I say that because we started quarterly, but may be going more often after the conference. Today's webinar is entitled Demographic Trends, Consequences for Community Development. It is being given by Don Albrecht, who has been the director for almost 12 years now of the Western Rural Development Center at Utah State University. He has a PhD in rural sociology and a master's in sociology, and I know I said that backwards. He was at Texas A&M for 27 years before, in different capacities, before taking this position. And his most recent books include Our Energy Future, Socio-Economic Implications and Policy Options for Rural America, Rethinking Rural, Global Community and Economic Development in the Small Town West, and Rural Housing and Economic Development. And if you see a trend there, it's rural, and that's something that's very important given the work we do with Extension. So a couple of things, everyone, please keep down background noise, keep your microphones muted. And I'll be muting here shortly. If you notice, we are recording the presentation, so it will be posted and available on the NACDEP website. If you've got questions or comments on places that are 2 hours ahead of the East Coast, please be sure to put those in the Zoom chat, and I'll be monitoring that and passing those along to Don during the presentation. And at this point, I will turn the meeting over to Don Albrecht.
Okay, thank you, Mike. It is a pleasure for me to be here, and I hope all of you are doing well in these unusual times and learning to work from home and the other things that we're required to do, which is kind of hard when you're doing extension work. I appreciate the opportunity of doing this, and to the extent possible, I'd like to allow discussion as we go. If I say something that you have a question or would like to add something additional to, let's deal with it then, and we can have other questions at the conclusion. So in talking about demographic trends, I think this is something that I've been examining kind of my whole professional career, and I think it's really important for Extension people to understand who is our audience, who are we working with, and how is that changing, and how is it going to be different in the future. And there are some really significant trends, and so I'm going to talk about some of the major demographic transitions occurring in this country. Some of the things I say you're probably well aware of, and I'll go over quite quickly. Some of them I hope there's information that you're probably somewhat aware of, but I can give you more details. Okay, Michael, it's not advancing now. Oh, there we go. Okay, so first of all, just to get us going, this graph shows how the population of the United States has been increasing. It's since 1900, there's more than 4 times as many people living in the country as there were then. Now, not only are there more people, but where they live is changing quite a bit as well. In this graph, it shows the number of people by the percentage of people by region. And what we see is that over time, there's been a movement of people from the northeast and north central regions to the south and the west. In 1900, for example, about 37% of the residents of the country lived in the west and the south. That is up to about 62% now. And so the majority of the population live in the south and the west, and 100 years ago, the majority lived in the northeast and north central parts of the country. This is showing that this trend continues. This shows population change by state. And as you look, the fastest growing states, this is between 2000 and 2018, are in the west or the south: Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Texas, Idaho, Florida. And you have to go way down the list here before you find a state that is not in one of those two regions, and that is North Dakota, which shows up because they've had a major energy boom in recent years. And at the other end, you look at the states that are not growing as fast. And Michael, you can see your West Virginia there are states in the other two regions of the country. Okay, dear to my heart is the metropolitan, non-metropolitan shift. If we go back to 1900, as you can see from this graph, about 72% of the population of the US lived in non-metropolitan areas. Not only have urban areas been growing faster, but the actual number of residents in non-metropolitan counties has been declining. Part of this, of course, is that some counties that were non-metropolitan have become metro, but generally the more rural parts of the country have been economically stagnant or declining, while the urban areas have been growing rapidly. So we went from 72% being non-metro to, at the present, we're only about 14% of the population is non-metro, which raises interesting and serious questions for extension when, you know, the 87% of our clientele live in the cities. How do we serve everybody? Okay, another major change is distribution by age. And the big change here is there at the top, the number of older people is growing. So if we look at the percent of the population that's 45 or older, it's gone from about 18% to about 42%. And the big growth, of course, is in the population age group that's 65 or more. And with the aging of the baby boom, this proportion is going to continue to increase. And down at the other end, there's way fewer, a much lower proportion of the population that are 15 and younger. So again, as extension people, what that means for us is that you know, the clientele that we're serving, the people we're working with, tend to be much older than they did in the past, and this trend will continue. This graph shows the actual number of people who are 65 and older. Obviously, this is growing very, very rapidly. But not only is the total population over 65 growing, but the number of people who are 85 and older or 75 and older is growing especially rapidly. Okay, let's talk about the distribution of the population by race. If we go back to, say, 1970 and before, about around 90% of the population of the United States was white. Okay, beginning in the 1970s, 1980s, this number has been declining quite rapidly. And in 2017, we were down to about 61% of the population being white, with big growth in primarily other people that are not white or African American. So this is mostly the Latino population and Asian populations. I'll show more of that in just a minute. Okay, and this varies widely by age. So this graph shows the percent of the population who is white by age. So if we go to 65 and older, we see that almost 80% of the residents of this country who are over 65 are white. We go down to the other end for the population that's 0 to 9, the children. Now, less than 50% of those are white. So the majority of the children in this country are minority.
Don, That's white
Go ahead.
non-Hispanic, correct?
White non-Hispanic. Thank you very much for adding that. That is very true. So if we go to our states, two states with the largest number of residents, California and Texas. California, only about 23% of the kids under 9 or under are white, non-Hispanic white. And in Texas, it's only about 30% are non-Hispanic white. Okay, so this is another way of showing the same thing. So the orange is non-Hispanic white, the blue is minority. So if we go up to over 80, what we see is that there's 9.8 million white people in this age group compared to 2.5 million minority. So, you know, they're about almost 80% non-Hispanic white in this age group. We go down to the 0 to 9, the children again, and there are 20.3 million minority children compared to 19.9 million white children. So more minority children than white children. And this trend is going to continue. One thing this graph shows is that the non-Hispanic white population of this country is older. We're not having babies anymore as much. And so, you know, you look at this 50 to 59, 60 to 69, where lots of people there, and those groups are not having children anymore. And so the consequence is in 2016 and 2017, most likely in 2018 and 2019, when we see the numbers, the number of non-Hispanic white people in the United States has actually declined. In these populations, the number of deaths is exceeding the number of births. This graph takes some projections into the future. If you look at the top line is the total population, it's expected to increase up to about 400 million by 2060. The non-Hispanic white population is expected to decline by about 20 million people. So it's expected to go from about 198 million down to about 178 million. What you see is that down at the other, the African American, the black population is going to increase about 15%, well, increase about 40%, no, 15%, while the Hispanic and the Asian populations are going to grow very, very rapidly. And demographers estimate that it'll be about somewhere between 2040 and 2042 or so, the United States will become a majority minority nation. That means that there will be, the minority population will outnumber the white population by that time. Okay. Michael, I see a bunch of people that, do they need to be admitted? Or are we okay?
No, they're okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
The movement in the chat was just that there was a couple of comments that we'd have to come up with better nomenclature, because that's just what you pointed out there. What the majority will become a minority, and you know there's different. There will be plurality. There won't be a particular ethnic group or racial ethnic category with a majority of the population.
Yeah, that's true. So right now there are 5 states that are where the non-Hispanic white population is no longer the majority. Several other states are on the verge. The state of New Mexico is on the verge of becoming the first state that is majority Latino. And so, you know, when we're trying to come up with our nomenclature, it gets even more interesting and confusing as we go on. But the point is, for decades, the United States is becoming a much more diverse population. and it's going to continue to. And this is regardless of our immigration policy. And I'll show you some more numbers a little bit later, but the white population tend to be older. They aren't having many babies, and so they're just not increasing as much, while minority populations are, the number of children they're having is greater, they're younger, and all these kinds of things. So, okay. Another big change going on in this country is changing in household sizes. So if we go back to 1900, we can see that about 45% of the households had 5 or more people in them, and 5% of the households only had 1 person. Okay, and then we progress up to the present. The number of households with 5 or more people has gone from 45% to 9%. That's a big decline. The number of 1-person households has gone from 5% to 28%. And so more and more of us are living alone. Fewer and fewer of us are living in large households with 5 or more people in them. Okay, and so this is the average household size. 1900 is 4.6. We're now down to about 2.5. And then if you look at, this is fertility rates between 1950 and 2019. And you can see why the 50s is referred to as a baby boom. If you look at all the average woman in the 1950s, you get to the peak year, 57, 58, along in there, was almost 4 babies per person. Now we're under 2. So the average woman today in her lifetime has less than 2 children, which is less than replacement. And you know that decline took place very rapidly during the 60s for a wide variety of reasons, including the invention of the birth control pill, women entering the labor force. Another big factor was that back in the day when a lot of us lived on farms, children were an economic asset. You know, when I was growing up on the farm, I could be of benefit to my father in getting the work done. Most of us don't have those kind of jobs anymore, and children become an economic liability. We have to feed them and stuff, and there's no economic returns kind of thing. And so you can see this. And when we're having less than 2 children per person, that means we're less than replacement level. That means if a couple is not having 2 children, they're not replacing, you know, the woman and her husband. And so this will be interesting going forward. Okay, another interesting trend, I think is very interesting, is age at first marriage. So if we go back to 1950, the age at first marriage for men was about 22.5, and for women it was about 20. And now that has been going up and up and up. In 2018, the average age at first marriage for men was almost 30, and for women it's about 27.5. And so people are obviously getting married at a much later date. And another interesting trend here is there's a big divergence by social class. That there's one group of people that are getting married after college and after they have their degrees. Another group of people are getting married younger, or else having children younger. And so yeah, there's big differences here. Okay. This is distributions of households by household type. Okay, if we go back to 1950, you see almost 80% of households in this country were a married couple. So that means if you knocked on the door of any place where people were living, about 80% inside of there would be a man and a woman who are married to each other. Okay, then you can see the one person, the other not. Another family is typically, so to be labeled as a family by the census, it has to be two or more people who are related by marriage or birth. So the other family tends to be single parent households, primarily single mother households and their children. And that number has grown. The number of one person household has grown. And the other non-family, this would be two or more unrelated people, roommates, people cohabitating, those kind of things. And that number has increased quite a bit as well. It was I remember when we first dropped below 50% of the households being, or less than 50% were married couple, it was a big deal. There was a lot of attention to that on the news and that type of thing. Okay. Another trend that I find fascinating and having major repercussions in this country is this graph shows the median earnings of male and female full-time year-round workers between 1973 and 2018 in 2018 dollars. And so we've taken inflation out of the mix. And what this graph shows is that the median male income reached a peak in 1973 and has never been as high since. And so the typical male worker makes less now than he did in 1973 in terms of buying power. And that has all kinds of repercussions. If we go back to the 60s and 70s, that there were a lot of families where the dad could go to work and the family could live on what he made, and that has been less and less the case as time has gone on. This graph also shows that the average income for women has been increasing. The gap between male and female incomes has diminished, and female incomes are still less than male incomes. And so there are still families doing reasonably well. A lot of those consist of a family where both the husband and the wife work. The families where they just depend on one income, it is increasingly more difficult for them. And there is a growing, as we saw, there's a growing proportion of households where there are not a married couple. So there's only one adult in the house. And so in those circumstances, it becomes increasingly difficult to make ends meet. So, this means that there are millions and millions of households, families in this country that are just trying to make ends meet is just way more difficult than it used to be, as with the decline of male incomes. Now, overall, our economy has been more productive. The total amount of money we make is growing, but what this graph shows is that an increasing share of this money is going to the wealthy. So the blue line at the end, the tallest line, are people in the first quintile. That means people who make in the top between 80 and 100% of household incomes. Okay, you can see that the amount of money that these households make has increased dramatically since 1973. The second quintile has gone up some. The third quintile has gone up just a little bit. The fourth quintile has pretty much stayed the same, and the fifth quintile has actually gone down. So people at the bottom of the economic scale are making less, while people at the top are making a lot more. The proportion of money going to the very wealthy has increased dramatically than compared to years past, and we're about the same level as we were during the robber baron era of Rockefeller and Carnegie and the guys. Okay. Another along this line is that there is an increasingly stronger relationship between median household income and educational attainment. Okay, what you can see here, this is in 1917, is that people with more education are making more than people with less education. That's not surprising. I'm sure that people with a professional or doctorate make, I don't know, 4 times as much as people with a high school degree only. But what is also significant is that the gap between incomes of people with higher amounts of educational attainment and those without is been getting greater and greater. Going back to the other scale, people with a high school degree are less, in constant dollars, are making significantly less than they did a few decades ago, while people with an advanced degree are making more. So the gap is getting wider and wider. A lot of this is that the middle income jobs in the goods producing industries, industries like manufacturing, logging, mining, the number of jobs in those industries has declined considerably, primarily because machines have been replacing humans in the production process. We just don't need as many people to produce what we were producing before. We've lost, for example, 6 million manufacturing jobs since 1980, but our manufacturing productivity has doubled during that time. But with those 6 million manufacturing jobs gone, that's a lot of jobs that people without an advanced education could obtain and make a reasonable income on. So, okay, that is what I wanted to share. I would like to open it up to people to for questions. And Michael, what's the best way of doing this? Can we open the microphones up?
That would be fine. There was one question that was in the, you can put them in the chat, or if you feel comfortable on the microphone, open them up one at a time. There was one question about midway through, you showed the population projections through 2060 by race ethnic groups. There was a question as to what the source was on that material.
That is Census Bureau.
Okay.
Those are numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau.
Okay. So, this has been a very
and the slides I have here, you know, I'm happy to send to all, share them with everybody, and however you want to do that, Michael.
I think the intention is to get this all posted with the slides and the discussion, so that'll all be available just like under webinars on the NACDEP website. And once that's all prepared and posted, we'll send out a link to the membership. This has been very informative. I think you know, a lot of these are trends that we kind of sense are going on, but seeing the numbers, I mean, to me, the most fascinating thing, or one of them, is the household size, because it explains why we continually see so much more residential construction in places that the population is not growing. Yeah, because you need more. I mean, you know, so at one point, West Virginia actually led this nation in sprawl per capita. And if you noticed in the chat, West Virginia's population has been between 1.7 and 2 million people for almost 9 decades now. So it's not exactly a booming place for new people, but it gets new construction. On that point, I will stop babbling and invite anyone who wants to ask a question of Don about the demographics that he presented or anything else related to just chime in. If you put them in the chat box, I will read them. And actually, there's a couple that have come in from there. I'll take those. Actually, they're rolling pretty quickly through here. So why don't I just start taking them? the first was from Ron Wilson. It says, despite the higher financial return associated with higher levels of education, we are now seeing states emphasize technical education needed for tradesmen, et cetera, to the detriment of higher education. Do you have any comment on that?
That is a very, very interesting point. And I've been to a bunch of meetings that have discussed this, and I think it's rather complex. Clearly, looking at the data, you and your children are going to be better off if they get a college education or more. At the same time, college isn't for everybody, and as I travel around the rural West, I find lots and lots of places where they need. Okay, what I would say about this is everybody, all of your kids, everybody you come into, tell them that they need something beyond high school if they're going to make it. But college isn't for everybody. There's a great need for electricians, for plumbers, for mechanics, for some of these trades. And so emphasis and entities that are preparing people for these, I think that is great. And it's going to be, we need those. But the point is, everybody needs something beyond high school these days. It's just really hard to make a living with a high school degree alone.
The next question is from George Ocanti, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name. It's complimentary about the wonderful presentation and revealing data, but he wanted to know, how would you line the trends to extension personnel and the population they serve? What can we do? I think that might be trying to get at, how do we match up what we're doing with who we have in the system?
Yeah.
Don?
Give him just a second. Hopefully his
Okay.
bandwidth will come back. And we'll be able to hear him in a moment.
I wasn't sure if it was he or I who had, because I've had that happen where I'm, if for, it's for those, as we've all discovered, at some point it freezes and it turns out that you're the one who's actually frozen. There was one comment about, that it probably can, whoa, I think we just lost, okay.
He's probably just trying to log back in or get a new connection, so I'm sure he'll be back with us momentarily.
Okay. We'll read Gwen's, we'll try to address these. We'll wait. There is one comment that probably is more a comment about from Gwen Stewart, just about the census can be wrong. Here he is. Okay. Don, you okay? Don, you need to unmute yourself. Uh-oh.
Okay. The problems of technology, I guess. And the problems of working from home, where my level of internet is not at the quality of my office, I guess. Anyway, generally, back to the question, for most is going to be less likely to be white. It's more likely to be single or in a smaller family. There's going to be a significant number of them that are going to be struggling financially. And so, I think it's important that we recognize and try to serve that clientele that really need us, I think. So, okay.
Next question from Paul Hill. It says, what data do you have on net migration in rural versus urban counties? What is the trend in negative net migration for rural counties?
Okay, good question. First of all, a really interesting thing is that overall migration, if we go back to the 1990s, we used to say America was a nation of movers, that 1 out of 5 people was moving every year. The number of people moving has gone down considerably. it's about half of what it was. And I think there's lots of reasons. I think a big one is the 2-career households, that it's, if you just have one person with a job, moving makes sense. For both of you to find a job is way more difficult. But anyway, back to Paul's specific question. There is overall a general migration trend from rural to urban. That's been that way for most decades except the 70s. So there's more people leaving rural areas, moving to cities. Incomes are better, there's more jobs. And Paul is in the business of trying to change that trend, and by making it possible for rural people to overcome the disadvantage of distance and work remotely. So a lot of us are learning how to do this, but yeah, still the trend is rural to urban.
Okay. Now, Gwen Stewart, I mentioned this while you were reconnecting, just talking about that census can be wrong. And Gwen's from a county in Southeast Ohio, and noted that the census showed them with the highest population of 65 plus in the state, because they took the 1,200 residents of the state prison in the group quarters and classified them all as in the 65 and over classification, when they were all more 25 to 40, hoping to fix it. We know there's these anomalies in the census.
Right.
But overall, what's the quality of the data that the census puts out?
I think, and right now, if you guys haven't filled out the census, do so now. I think it's the best we got. There's clearly mistakes. The Census Bureau actually has a multi-billion-dollar budget this year to try to, if you didn't fill it out and send it in, they would come and knock on your door. They're not doing this right now because of COVID, but they make a great effort to get a good accurate count, and clearly there's problems. And again, this is where it's important to look at your local situation. If you have a prison that they miscounted, there's those kinds of, I've worked in a community that had this was in Idaho, had the lowest per capita income in the state. Well, nearly everybody there is a college student. And so it's a bit misleading there as well. So you need to look at the local anomalies that are going to make things look different than they actually are, I think. So
yeah, and it's amazing, because sometimes retailers don't understand that. And generally, when you've got a lot of college students, you actually want retail because they've got disposable income, but they're showing up with no income, so they go to the next town over instead of where they need to be. And no, because that happened here in Morgantown. It took the retailers a while to figure out, oh, we don't need to be in Clarksburg, which is 30 miles south. We need to be in Morgantown. Question on, speaking of income, Melinda Grismer asked, how do you explain the income disparity in terms of why men are making less overall, but women are still making less than men? Does it have anything to do with work interruptions that affects female income?
Yeah. So first of all, as you see on the news, the white working class is making less, as I've talked about, because of the loss of jobs in manufacturing and mining and logging and those kinds of occupations. Women still make less. The gap is closing. There's several reasons for that. One is that women are more likely to go into industries that pay less to begin with. So, and this is changing. This is gradually changing. You go to an engineering class, and it's still predominantly male, and engineers make more than a lot of other people. There's real strong evidence that work stoppages, that you leave the workforce for a couple of years to have babies and to get them in school and that kind of stuff. Your income never catches up with a man who worked straight through those years. And so there's lots of reasons for that, but yeah, it's closing, not closed yet, and it's going to be a long time, current trends, before it is closed. Hi. Michael, I can't hear you.
I just got the warning that had still muted myself. What's left in the chat box was just that Melinda asked Gwen how I figured out that they were the prison population, and they worked with the Miami University Scripps School of Gerontology and found that the group's quarter error. But since I've started reading this, Jody Gale has come in with a new question, and he's asking, extensions historically had a higher percentage of FTEs allotted to rural places than urban. Do we have data that shows this? Are extension administrators across the system increasing pressure for respective state legislatures to reallocate more FTEs to urban places?
The first part of this, Jody, that's a very interesting question. I'm going to get the data to show the allocation of extension people by rural urban. I think that there's, even though we're 87, 88% urban these days, extension has always viewed themselves, and coming from USDA and everything, they've kind of viewed themselves as the spokesman and the help for rural America. I think that continues. I personally hope that it continues, but there's still, I think extension administrators are getting pressure to, there's more and more elected officials in state legislatures from urban areas that don't understand and don't see the need for extension. And so I think they're feeling the need to show the relevance to urban areas to continue the funding. And obviously there's a lot extension can do in urban areas, but I think, you know, my personal bias and everything else is we still have a lot to do in rural America.
Okay. As near as I can tell, I think I've addressed, oh, here, back every time I said, good. We got two more questions that come in. Can you from George Ocanti again, and again, I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. Can you summarize the implication for extension given all this data? How do we get ahead of this?
Okay. So George, I think the key is to be aware of the trends and knowing where we're going. That the trends I talked about are going to continue with growing elderly population, growing minority populations, those kinds of things. I think to be aware of it and make yourself relevant to these other populations. And I think the best thing we can do is just be aware of trends and keep on top of the data, know what's going on, and know who our audience is.
And Paul asked about something very timely, the COVID-19 outbreak, and seeing how it's been often clustered in urban areas, could that actually lead to people wanting to move to migrate away from those places?
You know, again, and I think this is a very relevant, very interesting question. What a lot of us have learned in the past month is that I can work very effectively from my home. And consequently, by working effectively from my home could be anywhere I want it to be. You know, I don't have to live near my office anymore. And so I think because
Oh dear. This is Betsy. It looks like, are you guys still there?
COVID outbreak. Okay. Can y'all hear me?
I can. That must have just been mine.
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. But anyway, I think there may be a trend towards more people choosing to live where they want to live rather than where they have to live because they can work remotely. And I think, again, for us working in rural areas, this is a big opportunity that with declining logging and manufacturing jobs, why not get some of these highly paid professional workers to live in your place because they'd rather live there and their bosses in Los Angeles or Salt Lake City or Dallas or wherever.
And
okay.
you know, one thing just along with this, and it's kind of instructive given that Don lost connection, we're going to have to really, to achieve that, we're going to have to emphasize the need to bridge the digital divide.
Absolutely. And it needs to be better for everybody, but especially for rural Americans where it is especially bad, I think.
Gail just asked if it said it would be very interesting to know the percentage of FTEs by race over time and extension as a measure of increasing our diversity to better meet the changing diversity of our clientele.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jody. And I will see if I can pull these data together, because I think it would be really, really interesting, and see if that's changing over time, if we're keeping up with the changes occurring in the nation. Okay.
It would be really instructive to see if our our more seasoned extension people probably resemble the older demographic trends, but if our new hires are resembling the current demographic trends or the older demographic trends.
Yeah, that would be a really interesting question. And I will, I'm not sure exactly how to get the data, but I'm gonna ask and find out, see if I can see this. Good point, Jody.
Okay. Again, I think to the best of my knowledge, I've captured everything that has been in the group chat. Is there anything else, any other questions anyone has for Don? I don't want to keep people here, but if we're finished, but I don't want to have people depart without getting a chance to ask a question if they have one.
And if you think of something when we're done, please feel free to shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to respond the best I can.
Okay, I don't see anything else. Don, do you have any last nuggets of wisdom you'd like to share before we end the meeting?
Well, it's been a great pleasure. I wish I could see all of you in New Hampshire, but good luck and stay safe, and hope to see you all soon.
Yes. Well, everybody, thank you for participating, and we will work to get this posted on the website, and we'll let you know. Thank you. And thanks to Don and Becky Newman, the Assistant Director at the Center, for helping make this happen.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We'll see you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.